Hello, wonderful people. Welcome to our Japanese maple painting event. Sorry about all the trouble of getting the live stream started, but hopefully it's all working now. You guys go ahead and leave a comment in the comment section if you are having any trouble hearing us or anything like that. And I've got Brad, the IT guy, is working on all of the nerdy stuff over on the computer, so if you have any questions, just direct them to him and he can hopefully help you out on all of that. I'm gonna get started on the painting in a moment, but welcome you guys. Thank you for joining us for this live stream, and we can't wait to get started with you. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over the supplies that I have on the table in front of me. So first off, of course, I've got my canvas, and it's just right here in center, and I've got it just laying flat on the table. If you wanted to bring it up onto any books or any towels, you can kind of slant it if you'd like, if you don't have an easel. I have over here, I've got my paper towels, and then ready I have a palette knife. I have two different size brushes, just kind of a pointed and a flat brush. They don't have to be the exact same size, but this is generally what I'm working with today. And then for the background, I'm gonna try to do the whole thing in just this foam brush and get it all filled in. Then I've got my large glass of water, not for drinking unless you're feeling very adventurous. And your cup probably doesn't look as gnarly as this, but try to avoid drinking it. And then of course I've got my palette right here. And of course our kits, which are available on our website at any time, and they'll be for all future events. You'll be able to access this video and as well as just get the whole set sent to you at any time. But I've got on my palette, and the black, if you can see, it had a little bit of a blowout problem. But I've got black, I've got burnt sienna, kind of a warm brown right here. I've got white, and then I've just got kind of a primary bright red. And then I have what would probably be about a cadmium or just kind of a bright orangey kind of yellow. And that's what I'm gonna do the whole painting in. All right, so to get started, we're gonna paint the whole background. And then we'll be able to do the kind of splatter effect to get the whole background filled up. But let's mix our pale yellow kind of cover first. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my foam brush, and I can do the mixing with this as well. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get it into my water, and I want that water to get soaked all the way through. And then I'm just gonna squeeze out any drips into my water cup. I just don't want it dripping wet. And then if there's any like drops or anything like that, you can kind of get those out on your paper towel as well. And I'm gonna start with mostly white. So what I'm gonna do is gonna pull out a good section of my white and just kind of divide it from that pile so I can mix into it without having to worry about tinting the rest of my white. And then I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna put just a tiny, tiny freckle of yellow in here. I want this to be a really, really pale kind of, just kind of an off buttery kind of off-white to start out with. And then as I get it on my canvas, I'm going to be putting in a little bit more of my yellow. So at this point, if you guys don't have any drinks poured for yourself, this is a paint and sip, and it is already 3 p.m. on a Saturday. If you're not sipping on something delicious by now, is it really a Saturday? So you guys make sure you've got that before we get started. And don't forget, even if it's live stream, you guys can pause at any time. I'm just going into mostly the edges of my canvas and getting this color in. Kind of put it on a little bit thicker, and you'll have more to mix into later. And in the end, if you guys need to pause and do a second coat of any of these colors, you can. I'll also probably give you guys some dry breaks. I'll give you guys a few minutes, but again, don't forget, you can pause me. If you're tired of listening to my voice, you can stop me at any time. And I'm just kind of focusing on getting this filled in the corners first, and then I'll darken it as it goes into the center of the canvas. It's still gonna be pretty pale, but it'll be a little bit of a gradation getting that filled in. Okay, so I've just kind of got these corners. If it's hard to see on camera, it's just a soft yellow, really subtle. And then what I'm gonna do is probably grab a little bit more of my white, and always pull from the edge of your pile of white, just in case, so you don't dip your dirty brush right in the center. You won't be able to get pure white later. And I'm just going to get it more yellow, and you can get as much yellow as you want in this, or as little, up to you completely. I'm gonna start towards the center, and then I'm just gonna start brushing out into those kind of wetter, more pale areas, and it's gonna start blending into those because that paint is still wet. So you wanna jump into the step as quickly as possible so you can make sure that you're mixing into paint while it is still wet. I'd love to know who's painting along with me today. If you guys are just watching it for fun, I totally get it. But if you guys are actually trying to paint along, I would love to know who's doing it. So go ahead and leave a comment, maybe what city you're in, and if you're painting along, just let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
We have Eric from Ecuador.
Eric from Ecuador. Hi, Eric. How's it going down there? Eric just moved from Gig Harbor. I'm assuming it's the same Eric. And he's enjoying Ecuador weather. He's up in the mountain regions, so it's not even too hot. It's just beautiful. Can't wait to visit. All right, so you guys can go as crazy with this yellow as you want to. I'm already further beyond how much yellow is in like the OG painting, but that is all chill. You guys can do whatever you'd like to. I don't know if I just made it very clear that I'm a millennial by that kind of colloquialisms, but there we go. It is what it is, right? It's chill. Can you guys believe it's already halfway through January? Isn't that exciting? It's gonna be Christmas next week. All right, so this is going to blend lovely and smoothly as long as the paint is wet, but it's gonna get tacky pretty quickly. Not unattractive, just tacky like paint. It's gonna get a little bit harder to paint. So you guys wanna stop at some point when it stops being easy to push around, and we're gonna go into the next portion of the painting, which is the best part, which is the splattering. So I'm gonna leave this and try to keep it soft. Don't forget, if you decide you don't like this background or anything goes just a little bit off kilter, you're totally allowed to not like it. I'm sure it's beautiful though. And when you're doing the background, it's really hard to judge when finish is finished because this is literally step number 1, and it's really hard to judge what looks right or what's just too much. So I encourage you guys to not worry about doing things over again, but also give it some time to dry, and you can do a second layer if you need to. I'm going to leave it because I keep wanting to brush into it and it's just gonna get more and more yellow, and I wanna leave it a little bit more pale. So what I'm gonna do with this brush is just fully submerge it in my water cup. If you guys are totally done with it, you can rinse it out in your sink just like you would any other sponge. If you hated this brush and you never want to use it again, you can throw it away. These are really meant to be disposable, but you can reuse them if you go squish them out underwater really quickly. So what I'm going to do next though is get the splatters in there, and it's okay to do this while it is still wet. Again, if you decided you want to change anything about your background, it's best to let it dry first, and you don't want to do the splatters while you do that. So this is it's just the best part of the whole painting. So you need both brushes. So I'm going to start with the big one. I'm going to mix my color. You can go with just pure black, but I'm going to add some water right here. You can go with pure black, but I'm gonna add some red to it, even some of your brown. I'm gonna pull out a little bit of red, pull in some black, mix whatever you want to, but I'm just gonna do just kind of a mixture of all these darker colors. You can even just pick up your straight brown or straight red or anything like that too. And you want it to be about the consistency of heavy cream, approximately. And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your other brush and you're gonna use it to do the tap, tap, tap. We're gonna add some larger swirls at the end, but these are gonna be your little splatters. And one of the things you wanna do before you get started on this is make sure that there's no goobers of paint in your brush, or they will come out at the worst time possible. Of course, the closer you get, the smaller your splatter will be. And you can turn your brush and do the broad end, and I feel like it gets finer mist that way. And just do as much as you'd like to. Don't forget you're gonna have branches cover quite a bit of this, so you can get a little extra and half of it will get covered up anyway. So a little bit more is a good thing. And then I'm again gonna do some thicker swirls later on. Now, if you get splatters like that, obviously there's gonna be a branch that goes in front, probably in that area, but also there's nothing saying that your splatters can't get a little stringy. So you can put a lot of force in there and get these little stringy bits as well. And that looks cool. Get more of like that sideways splatter. Just make sure you're not hitting your friend if you're painting alongside someone. It'd be funny, but maybe not a good thing for your relationship. When you're done with that, wipe off your brush on your paper towel. We're actually gonna get into the tree next. I'm gonna give you guys just a couple minutes though to get caught up. So we're gonna put just the drying break screen up, and that's just gonna give you a minute to get all caught up. I wanna give you a little bit of a break, but don't take too long on getting that background. If you haven't done the splatters yet, go ahead and dive into that as quickly as possible, because chances are it's gonna finish off the look that you're not quite sure about, and then we're gonna get some big old branches in front. So again, I'm just gonna put a drying break on the screen, and I'll just be gone for about 2 minutes, okay? All right, so what we're gonna do next is do that sketch in for our tree. It is okay if it mixes in with some wet paint in the background. That's why we're moving on to this next step right away. When it comes time to do the final layers on top though, we will let it dry just a tiny bit more, but we can get the sketch in and let it pick up some of that background, and it's gonna stir into those colors and just create a little bit more interest and a little bit more texture just by doing brush strokes. So don't worry if it is still wet in the background. We can always do a second layer once it's a little bit more dry. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my kind of medium-sized brush. This one is what I'm gonna do the sketching in, and then we'll use our larger one to fill in the larger portions, of course, and when we want to thicken it up, but we can get some finer lines with this. So you always get your brush wet first, and the other brush that I was just using is in my water. I don't want it sitting out or it'll dry out really quickly, and then it might just harden and be unusable. So just make sure everything just kind of goes back into your water. So I got this wet first, and then I'm just gonna go over to my black and do some sketching with that. So I'm just gonna pull some of this black out, and to keep your brush small, I just kind of swirl in the paint with the water that's in the brush. And then I usually just make sure there's no water on the ferrule of the brush, and then that way it won't drip on your painting later on. So you can of course place the branch wherever you want to. I do use the example as my inspiration, but you guys can deviate and make this painting yours in any way that you want to. So again, you can start the branch where I'm doing it, or I encourage you to just go crazy and do whatever you'd like to. So I'm gonna start over on the left-hand side and about halfway up the canvas. You can give yourself a little goal mark right over there. And then over on the right-hand side, I want to give myself about 5 or 6 fingers from the top. That's gonna be the very top of my branch. And then I want it to be about 4 fingers tall, at least to start out with. And that's gonna give us some good ideas for just kind of where we want it to grow from and where we know it's going to end. So from here, what I'm just gonna do is start with a very thin line, and I'm just gonna create a wavy line that kind of curves. And we're gonna add all the knobs and bendy stuff later on, so don't feel like this has to be the defining part. So when it comes over here, we want it to be about the width of that brush pushed all the way down, and then we want it to slowly increase its width as it goes across, and you can slowly do this. You don't have to do it as thick as I'm going to be putting it on here, but I'm gonna add some of these bends into this main branch. And then we've got our goal mark over here, and I'm just gonna have it curve down to meet that goal. So that's just gonna be the beginning, and then I'm gonna add more bumps as we go, but this is gonna be the start to that. And while I'm doing this kind of sketch part, what I'm gonna do is add there's 5 main branches. So we'll add the smaller branches later on, but the 5 main branches are gonna be the thickest ones, and keeping in mind the most important part is that the branches generally need to taper the farther away that they get from the tree trunk. Now this Japanese maple branch is a little bit different in that it's gonna have all of these bumps and bends in it, so it's not gonna stay consistently that way. You can get a lot more adventurous with this shape and not have to worry about it being just this perfect curve like a lot of the other trees that you find yourself maybe painting. So I'm not gonna get as particular. I'm gonna let it kind of get bendy and bow all the way around, but about where this kind of brings this curve, I'm gonna start kind of getting something in here, and it's gonna look knobby, but in the end, it's going to look really cool. So don't feel like it has to be this perfect shape. Now the only thing that I am gonna be following and try to make it look a little bit more natural by doing is curving the branches, not so they just kind of poke out, like over here, they don't just kind of come out, they actually curve out of that branch. So it really does look like they're growing from the tree rather than just sprouting directly out. So I'm gonna do these 2 branches over here. Again, don't worry about trying to match exactly where they go. And I'm just gonna try to make myself do things that are a little bit more jagged and a little bit more janky. And then once we do some soft flowers on top, it's gonna even make it even more accurate and more, it'll soften the whole look. So these jagged branches are just gonna add to the aesthetic of such a fun tree. So I'm gonna just go ahead and get 5 branches. There's kind of 6, I guess 6 kind of larger ones, but some of them are more close to the twigs. It's not gonna all get this thick. So when I go in to thicken them up, some of them will stay a little bit thinner. But there's gonna be another one up here on top. And don't forget to add water or the sketching won't flow. We kind of want to make this inky. And then this will just give me kind of placement for the tree branch, and then I'm going to switch to my large brush. So I've got 3 main ones up top here. I've got a drip. You might not want to smear it like that while you still have wet splatters, be careful. but you can just kind of lift it off or let it happen and see if it adds to the whole look. All right, I'm gonna do another one. It's best when you're doing these to not have them come out exactly the same place on either side. This one got a little bit close. It's better that they just don't exactly echo each other. So kind of place them in between or right after the other one. So inside this bend, I'm gonna get another one in here, and then one that finally goes off the canvas down here. And then don't be afraid to just kind of do lines that are jagged. They do go to kind of a bend rather than a soft bowing. Not like the planes, a bow like you shoot an arrow. All right, I'm gonna get that guy in the water, and then I'm gonna switch to my larger brush, and I'm gonna go ahead and do the fill in. Now, if your background is still wet, it'll just add that texture that we're gonna be having to add later on anyway. But I'm just gonna pick up pure black. I'm gonna go ahead and fill these in, and while I'm going back through, that's when I'm gonna start adding a little bit more bumps along the tree trunks. I'm gonna try to just make it look a little less smooth and precise. We'll add some twigs once we get the proportions of these filled out. And as you're painting these big branches, you're trying to grow your big one large as well, kind of take a step back from your painting, look at it from a distance and see if it looks balanced to you. In general, again, it should start the thickest over here and kind of taper, besides the kind of knobs that come in and add bumps and things like that. It should generally taper over there. So just kind of take a step back from your painting and see if it looks balanced. See if you maybe need another branch more than what we did, because your painting is going to be completely your own creation, and you might find that you just need more or less than the example up here. Don't worry about matching it exactly. This is your artwork. Have fun with it and just see what you do on your own and what you decide you want to add. All right, again, I'm just filling this in. I'm just trying to go in and add some more knobs to the tree, make it a little bit rougher. And then we'll add little branches coming off of these in no time. If you're trying to get a crisp edge to your painting and you want to use this big brush to do so, what you can do is make sure that your paint does have some liquid in it, so my brush stays wet. And I've kind of loaded it up with paint, and then what you'll do is you'll push the paint to the edge. And when you push the paint, it creates this kind of ring of paint on the very, very edge. And you push that to the perimeter, and that's going to get you a really crisp line. Rather than trying to lay your brush on its side and hope that the bristles do what you want them to do, use the whole flat end and push the paint to that edge. All right, and as soon as you're feeling like this brush is not doing what you need it to do, we'll switch back to our small one and get some twigs in there. Now the other thing is you can let this dry a little bit more before you get to that part, just in case you've still got quite a bit of your background mixing in. For these twigs, you might want them to stand up just a little bit more, so you can let those dry just a little bit before you move on too much. So you can use your flat brush and just kind of take advantage of the fact that it does have a flat, very tip, and you can draw twigs like that, or you can switch to your small one, whatever you are more comfortable with. My background is more dry, so I'm going to jump into it soon and kind of keep going with it, but first let's go ahead and add a little bit of texture to your background, or not your background, your tree trunk. So I'm going to take some yellow and some white and a little bit of brown. And we kind of want to take advantage of the fact that the black is still wet, so that we can mix into it and have things be really subtle when they stir in, and then our bright highlights will go on top later on and not stir in. So once you filled out that whole silhouette, take your brush on its side, and you can go with just pure brown if you want to, just pure white if you want, and I'm just gonna start dragging through some paint. If you pick up too much black, just wipe off your brush on your paper towel and go back. And then I'm just gonna kind of swirl it with the direction of the tree trunk itself. And it's gonna add the subtle details, and it'll mostly stir out, but that's what we're looking for. We want this to be the subtle parts, and then we'll do all of the bright highlights on top. So I'm just letting this brush stroke kind of follow along with the curve of the branches, twisting it, and you can use your other brush, your smaller brush, to do this. But I'm just gonna kind of twist and go up into these pockets of branch or tree trunk. I'm just gonna follow along, let yourself kind of get a little loose with this, have fun with it, and just know if you decide you don't like any brush strokes, you can take your black and just wipe it out like it never happened. Alright, this is just layer number one. We're gonna do some brighter ones on top, but this just kind of roughs up the black and makes it not as strong of a dark shape. It gives it a little bit more interest. And if you wanted to, you could take some of this and do some little dots of bark or little knots in there. And you guys can finish up that tree whenever you need to, but I'm gonna go ahead and get the little twigs in. If you need that background to dry, just let it dry, but don't stress if it's mixing in just a little bit. So what I've done is I've got some water and I'm stirring it in, just kind of like how we did before to sketch. I'm stirring it in, I'm creating kind of an inky black, and then I'm gonna spin out my brush so that all of the extra paint spins out and I've got it back to its point. That's how you can load up a round brush. Now the other thing, and the other reason maybe let it dry just a little bit more, is because I like to steady my hand by planting it on the canvas and being able to drag my whole hand. So if your whole background is still wet, that might not work for you. And then if you're trying to control it by being way up here and dragging it, you'll get really loose brush strokes, and that might work perfectly for you. But if you want to get a little bit more control, planting your hand, just like when you write, is going to be best. So just think about what's working for you, take your time, and I'm just gonna start doing little twigs that are coming off of these branches. Now again, keeping in mind that tapering, and then one of the things that I see people struggle with is just having these branches get long. So a lot of people think branches, so they think just these little twigs that come off, which we want to have those mixed in, but you also want some branches that come out and actually fill up and go off the rest of the page. So you do want to make sure that you have a mixture of thick and thin branches, but then also not every branch should look the same, and also, more importantly even, is branches that overlap each other and are not afraid to run into each other. They grow and expand and should kind of grow randomly and in front of their other branch friends. So when I get to the end, I'm also kind of, if you can see it in the painting, I'm also going to be kind of lifting my brush and letting it taper just by releasing the pressure of my brush stroke. And then I always brush on branches the exact same way. So I'm trying to go in and add just a little bit more untidiness, kind of going back in and visiting some of these and adding little brush strokes that just make them look a little bit looser. It's not, the original painting is not how I normally paint, so it's really fun to get in here and just kind of give yourself permission to just be a little bit more random, a little bit looser. So I'm going back into these branches and kind of following along the curve and trying to be a little more loose with where those branches go. And if you've got paper underneath you, that's a great place to practice doing some branches. Don't feel like you have to commit every time on your canvas. Everyone tends to do better when they practice something a couple times at least beforehand. I practiced drawing a lot before I even started painting. So I'm trying to make these branches bend and bow in ways that I don't normally. So I'm gonna take my time and get these filled in. You guys take your time as well, have fun with it. These little ones are really how this whole painting gets really filled up. And don't even worry if your branches aren't even like connecting to each other. There's some areas that you can have them kind of break apart. And if 1 or 2 or 5 branches get a little funny looking, let's just make sure that we put some beautiful flowers on top and just cover our little incidents. I think mistakes are just an excuse for embellishment is one of my favorite quotes that gets me through a lot of trauma. It's gonna look so much better with flowers on it. It's a little bit creepy, or it's like a sunset. It's like a sunset back there. It's nice. just kind of zen out and do some branches. Take your time, have fun. And don't forget the whole leaning back from the painting or looking at it from a distance, taking a picture of it with your phone. Any way that you can shrink it down and see that big picture is going to be how you can really judge the whole thing. Something about looking at the big picture is important to the process. So shrink it somehow or look at it from a distance and see any areas that you feel are already finished and you shouldn't touch it with any more branches, or some areas that just look a little bare and you need to put another branch in. Now after we do the flowers, you can still even put branches in after that, so it's not even finished at that point. You can keep revisiting it however much. So with these, it's good to start with a little bit less, and you can always add more branches later, because if you fill it too much, it'll look a little busy once we do flowers. All right, I'm at that point where I'm just thinking to myself, where should I do one more branch? And that is exactly when you should not do another branch. If you can't know for sure, don't do it. If you have a question, you have an answer. Again, that's a very important life lesson. Okay. I think this is an empty pocket, that's all. Okay, and then I'm gonna leave it alone. I'm gonna put dry break up on the screen again, you guys. So if you wanna give yourself a moment to finish up your branches, I'll give you guys about 5 minutes to get this part finished, because this should be dry before our next step. I will blow dry off camera, but I'll give you guys, again, 5 minutes and try to get caught up. And if you have a blow dryer handy, even better. You can go ahead and just put it under the heat or put it in your oven. I've heard of painters doing that too. That actually, there's no reason that wouldn't work. But okay, so I'll go dry mine, but put 5 minutes on the screen for you guys. Okay, so what we've done is dried off our tree. Again, if yours is not dry yet, you guys can pause if you'd like to. But also these colors can mix in and still create more variation if your colors are just most of the way dry. So we're gonna go ahead and do another layer into the branches because we want the flowers to sit on top of absolutely everything. So we're gonna go ahead and get the tree finished, and we'll probably give it another 5-minute dry break just to be sure, because the last thing we want is these blacks and browns mixing in with our flowers. So I'm gonna go ahead with my larger brush again. You can go with your smaller one if you'd like to. I'll probably switch between both of them, but again, just use whatever tools make you happy and are working for you. So I'm gonna go in with my kind of middle highlight colors. We kind of have these darker ones that mixed in with the black, and my tree is dry enough now that I can go in with the next layer and it really won't blend in. So I'm gonna go in with a brown. So I wanna make it a little bit more red though. So I'm gonna scoop up some red, go over to my brown, and then pull in about 2 parts brown to 1 part red, more or less, up to you and what you want. And if you wanted to pull in some yellow, you can. If you want to pull in some black and not have it as bright, you can go with that as well, whatever you feel. So here is the color I'm going to start out with. And I want most of this to be kind of up at the top of the knobbiest part of my tree. So I'm going to kind of start, and I want to swirl as it comes up and kind of follow the same bend that I had been doing with my last colors. And I just want to kind of thicken it up as it comes towards the top and kind of do some nice choppy brush strokes through here. As it comes down, I'll taper it just a little bit and even do some dashes with it so it looks even more like bark. Not just straight lines, but you can have some areas that really pile up with paint and little areas that you just put little dashes just to add some texture like just like a bark would be. So again, I'm kind of loading it up on the knob. I'm trying to follow the flow. I'm bending my brush and having it twist with that branch, and that'll make it look like these pieces of color are flowing with the branch. I'm gonna go down, once I've got this section in here, I'll give it a second to dry. It'll probably dry a little bit darker because of how dark it is behind it, so if you ever feel like you need a second layer, don't even hesitate, just go for it. I'm gonna take this color, I'm gonna go along and just add little bits along wherever I kind of feel like it. Just edges kind of close to the edge of the branches along the perimeter of them. And you can even coat for some of the thin ones. You can just go over the whole thing. And just little touches of warmth. This branch isn't just dark blacks and browns, but it's got a little bit of red, a little bit of fire in there. I'm just gonna add little bits more red, kind of going into the top here. Again, build it up layer-wise as much as you want. And keep in mind also, if you lay your brush flat, rather than digging in this way, this lifts the paint, depending on how thick you want it to go on. It lifts the paint at the same time that it's trying to apply it. So the flatter you go, it's like a butter knife. The flatter you go with your brush, as well as a palette knife later, which we'll do, more paint is delivered, the more flat you have your supplies. So keep that in mind if you're trying to get a nice thick coat of this red on. That's going to be all the difference. I'm going to wipe off my brush and go with just pure brown, maybe a little bit of white into it. And I want to do just a little bit more highlighting, kind of this transition color. And even pull some of your red into it if you want. And really, it's really about building those layers and those colors. In unexpected ways is always fun. But again, building those colors is how you create that texture. And texture is definitely, if you were to describe a tree trunk, all that bark and everything like that, texture is definitely what that all is. So the more we can add, the more realistic and the more kind of tactile the painting feels. The more you want to just kind of touch it, the more you can kind of feel it. Now, if you went too far, just pick up some black, wipe out, and kind of go back in, and this will mix with those colors right away, and let them stir in. I'll create even more colors. Our last color for this will be a highlight color. I'm going to go ahead and mix to my smaller brush. So I cleaned that out. I don't remember what was in it last, probably black. So this can be as muted as you want it to be if you don't want it to be as bright white as maybe in the original painting. It's going to be some white, some yellow, probably more white than yellow, and then a little tiny bit of your black and or brown. And we just kind of want to dull this color to just be kind of the same as your background color, really. So as much or as little yellow as you want. And if you want to make it orange, you can add a little bit of your red to it. And kind of the whole palette, really. And this will be our highlight color. I'm going to spin out all the extra paint on my paper towel, even water it down, because stirring it gets all that paint loaded up in those bristles, and I want to get a little bit more muted than that, so I don't want to put on as much paint. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of follow most of the exterior of these branches. Looking at the original painting will give you some good ideas, but I want to stay a tiny distance in from the edge. There's that line of black, and these aren't really paying attention to maybe a light source or anything. They're mostly just kind of bringing some highlights, and when you have just these random highlights in there, it's going to kind of invent a light source. So I'm putting up these branches and then up the tree trunk, kind of again trying to follow generally the perimeter of the branch. I'll have it kind of thicken, and then I'll kind of lift it off and let it fade. And I'm just going to again follow towards the center and have black on those edges of my brush strokes so that the tree always remains outlined at least. So kind of towards the bottom or sides of these branches, wherever you feel like you want to make them pop a little bit more. They don't have to be anywhere that specific, but I am also trying to make sure that my brush stroke is not solid the whole time. So what I do is I kind of increase pressure, lift, and then kind of dab and lift my pressure of my brush so that it's always changing just a little bit more. So I just kind of dab and lift off, and that creates kind of that same knobby kind of effect even with this highlight. So you can see kind of just lifting. And just in how you apply your brush strokes is exactly how you trick the eye into thinking there is something there. Painting is all about tricking the eye. And if you need to go back in and add outline again, if you accidentally covered up something, definitely not the end of the world. Okay, well, this is definitely less is more with this. We don't want to cover up everything that we just did. Okay, I'm gonna leave this simple. I'm gonna do a couple up in this thicker part of the tree trunk towards that red. And then we're gonna let this dry. Mine is almost dry, so I'm just gonna give a couple more minutes pause. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments section. If you're watching in the future, email us those questions and we'll be able to help you out. I'm gonna go ahead and leave it again at this point, and then finally we're gonna get into those flowers, and those are gonna be the final, kind of final touches, a couple layers to those. But we finally got this branch out of the way. I'm gonna go ahead and do a quick blow dry. I'll give you guys about another 5 minutes or so. Okay, so what I'm gonna do next is the first layer to the cherry blossoms. And if I did see Japanese maple earlier, we have another painting called that, and I just had a brain fart, so I apologize for that. Not to be confused, I'm sure you guys didn't get that confused by that. All right, so I've got my larger brush. We're gonna do the first layer of pinks to these. So it's gonna be about it's gonna be 2 layers technically, and then we're gonna do kind of some outlining in our gold color. But first we're gonna start with our soft pink. And you guys could tint this as white or as red as you want to. Again, this is our paler version of the color. So I'm gonna scoop up some white, put it near my red. I'm gonna pull in just a tiny bit. The red goes really far really quickly, especially when you're trying to make pink. So a tiny bit is going to do the job very, very quickly. So I need to grab more white. So add your pigments to your white always just as slow as possible. You can always add more, but taking it away is much harder. So this pink is fine just by itself, but I want to add a tiny bit of yellow, not to make it orange, but to warm it up. And see, you can see how much just adding a tiny bit of that yellow already completely screwed up that whole pile. So let's go ahead, instead of trying to mix into that and make that all happen, we're gonna go ahead and start a new pile over here. It's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. It's just don't try to make one pile work. Just kind of take out some portions of it, and let's start a new pile and see what we can do with that. That way you're not having to fight that so much. There we go. That yellow is maybe stronger than the red. All right, so what a lovely color. All right, so I'm just gonna kind of press out all the extra paint. And then these can go absolutely anywhere and everywhere. So this is just kind of the base. We're kind of creating a foundation, larger areas, and then we'll come back later and do our little segments of red inside of that. So this is gonna be where we go a little bit heavier with this color, a little bit more random. And I would almost encourage you guys to switch between your brushes. It's kind of a weird way to say that. I would almost encourage you guys. I would switch between your big brush to get the large areas in, and then use your smaller brush to get like individual flower areas in, or just use the corner of this, which is what I'll probably end up doing, is getting smaller parts with that. Now what I want to do is do a little bit more of a dry brushing thing where I'm not loading up the paint really thick, so I'm just going to wipe off all the extra until there's just a little bit getting delivered at a time. And then I'm just going to start traveling down the branches, kind of start going left to right. And what you want to be careful of is making sure that your flowers don't all have to touch a branch. They can kind of float out in an area. I see a lot of people who just kind of stamp dot, 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 dot along the tree, and that's not really how they grow. So you want to kind of think in clumps. Think in clumps, large sections that really fill up. They're not like squares, but they do kind of fill up. So I'll go ahead and just show you what I'm talking about, because sometimes doing is better than words. So I'm just gonna kind of swirl in some large areas, kind of over some of my branches, and I'm actually doing this circle, sometimes just half circle, of going in and filling in these large areas. Again, this is just the background for these, so they can be loose and not even as densely layered in as they need to be. So I'm gonna kind of just pick areas that I want these to be eventually, and this is just gonna be, again, layer number 1. It's gonna be the palest part. Make sure some go off the top of the canvas. We wanna make sure that they don't look like they just kind of stop randomly. For these individual ones, you can do a little swish, kind of a swish and flick with your brush, or you can switch to your small brush and do that at any time on top. So I'm just putting little dots and little flecks. Just make sure you maybe start with your clumps first. And if they go behind, if you decide that you want them to go behind the branches, get that pink all the way up to the branch, kind of shave it in there, and then start swirling away from that direction. So this paint is going on really thin. I want it to be really pale to begin with. And if you decide you want to bring any branches back later, wait for this all to be finished, and we'll paint the branches at the very, very end. They can go right on top very easily. It's really about being loose, which is why using a big brush is a really good idea. It forces you to be loose. And I'm kind of doing this whole crisscrossing thing. I'm kind of turning my brush, getting a cross stroke and going back in. Use the corner of it to get some small pieces, and just try to get some nice groupings. There was a competition for never mixing the right amount of paint, I would absolutely be the champion. And if your pink switches up the next time you mix it, even better, you're gonna have more variety. Lean back, see if there's areas that you feel like you're missing something. This doesn't have any pink down here, so it feels naked. All right, and I just said in my head, am I going too far? That means I probably already did. I'm gonna get some towards those edges. Double check that your edges, the pink does go to the edge on at least these 3 sides. It needs to touch the edge on at least these 3 sides. So I'm gonna make sure that I've got some clumpings down here, and they do go over. Rough it up a bit. Sure, why not? Okay. All right, so now I'm gonna go in with layer number 2. I'm gonna let the pink dry for only a smidge of a second. I'm gonna go with my gold, just because I can. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab my smaller brush. If your brush isn't the same kind of brush, you might find that you would rather use your medium brush for this part. It's totally up to you, whatever you're comfortable with. So I've got some water in here. I'm gonna pull out some of my gold, and kind of as far as how to do this, what I wanna do is kind of on the bigger clumps, I kind of want to just kind of pick a side and outline some of these and make it messy. My brush strokes are not actual like brush strokes curving and flowing. I want it to be a little bit messier than that. I'm just gonna go fill in some of those cracks in between the flowers. Flower crack. Isn't that what crack is made out of? Anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and outline just some of these really messily. And once we get the bright red in there, it'll make this all make sense. So I'm just gonna go in, and I love getting this just pure gold yellow in here because it just gives that kind of dynamic, kind of makes it mesh with that background. It just makes it glow just a little bit more. So I'm just being very random with this. I'm just kind of just choosing every other flower or so, or a clumping, and just kind of doing that dabbing of some pure gold. You can even follow some of the tree trunk if you want to, one of those branches, whatever you'd like to do. This is just a great way to create more texture and more interest without having to paint anything real. If you're feeling it, you can even do some dots of gold in your background. They don't even have to touch anything, you just do dots of gold. This painting just encourages you to make a mess, but in a good way. And if something got a little crazy, take your finger, smudge it out. Okay, less is more. So now I'm gonna finally use the palette knife for fun, just because it's a great way to create the density of paint and just kind of getting some smooshes in there. That's the term, smooshes. So I want red, but I do want to have a tiny bit of yellow in to make it a little bit, just that warmer color. So I'm gonna mix my red and yellow, and that red is stronger than the yellow, so I'm gonna stir in almost equal parts, and it's still not gonna make it orange. So as little or as much of that yellow as you want, or none at all, totally up to you if you just love red and you want that pure color. It's even good to do some of this orangey red and some of the pure red by itself, or even add a tiny bit of white, just so it's not so different of a color. So it's still a little bit pink. All right, so I stirred with a brush. It's better to mix some colors with that, though a palette knife is made to mix colors, so whatever you feel like you want to do. I'm just using this guy because I can kind of push down and kind of push the paint in. And I'll probably do some with my brush as well, but what I did is I've got the flat part on the bottom, and I'm going to load up this end of it, and I just want a little bit of paint out here. And experiment wherever you want to, even on your paper. I'm going to go into these areas of pink, and I'm going to start kind of experimenting with how I want to push down. So you can just kind of press completely, or you can kind of push hard and kind of get this kind of, just kind of, again, smushy is the technical term. Or you can kind of circle it if you want, or scrape it in a curve. And don't forget the whole butter thing. The more you push down or the flatter it is, the more that it's going to deliver. You can also do some scraping and get little pieces. And I've got very little paint on here. If you put a lot's going to get delivered, so you can experiment with that as well. You can just do all the pressing down that you want. Just don't cover up all of your pink. Let some of it be left, and just start going across your canvas as much or as little of this red as you want. And again, I'll probably visit this again with my brush and even smear some of this around. But this is a good way to kind of get it covered without being too careful. So this is just like any other brush. You want to clean it off before it dries off, or you won't be able to use it again. So just take it into, you can even get it a little bit wet, so just in case anything was starting to get a little bit tacky. And you just want to get all those edges, and that way it'll stay the same shape and you'll be able to reuse it again and again. So clean that out, and if you're not ready to clean it, just put it in your water, and that'll stop it from drying out as well. I'm going to go with my smaller brush, and I'm just going to kind of do a little bit of smearing out of some of these shapes. So I'll take some of the roots of some of them and just kind of smear them out, or even take some pink and just kind of go in and push out some areas that got a little bit rough, or I just want to add another color. I've got kind of a darker pink on my brush, and I'm just kind of being rough and smushing into these colors. You can add little dots of the darker bit that you can get the details with your palette knife. You can go in and add little dots of whatever you'd like to. It's good to have your flowers not all be the exact same shape, and some of them should be little buds, so you should have little specks here and there as well. Especially towards those ends of those branches where maybe buds would be growing. Now, one of the last details, if you want to add it, is creating some larger circles in the background. So that's kind of your black, a little bit of brown, and some red if you want to match that same color. And it's just adding a little, I'm taking the kind of the end of this brush and just kind of doing little swirls of just larger dots. It's nice to just kind of get a little bit more of that dark shadow color in other parts of the painting. So it's just kind of these open areas back here. And I'm just going to swirl my brush until I get just a little bit of a larger circle. It doesn't actually have to be a perfect circle. If you want it to be a perfect circle, use the end of your brush here. And I'm just going to do little swirly dots. And it's a good way to just kind of fill up that area that was feeling a little bare back here. And you can do it in between the branches as well. And just make sure again that these go off the side of the canvas. They don't all just start inside. And then since you've got this brush, You can go back in and bring out any of your branches that got too covered with flowers. If you want to bring any of these to the foreground, you can bring them back with a little bit of that dark color again. And you can add more if you feel like there's a flower just floating out there that really needs a connecting branch. This is your chance. It's a good idea to kind of skip over a couple flowers, like paint over one of them and then skip over another one, so it looks like there's some growing behind the branch and some going in front. So just as much as you want to bring back or leave in the background. Again, do that whole leaning back from the painting and see what feels right. Okay, so that is the last step to the painting. I hope you guys were at least a little entertained by it, and I hope you guys are painting along with me, and I hope you guys enjoyed this afternoon painting with uncorked canvas. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, I hope you had a lot of fun. I hope you feel inspired to do something on your own, and don't forget this kit is available if you want all of these supplies just shipped right to your door or for pickup at our studio. It's just the cherry blossom painting on uncorkedcanvas.com. Thank you again for joining me. Can't wait for next time. Bye now. Make sure you like and subscribe so you never miss out on the next big thing from Uncorked Canvas.